There is a trend you've already observed, even if you don't know it, that film, books, and the stage have been doing since the dawn of writing. It's called the rule of three, and whether it was initially by design or not, us savvy modern humans are now very much aware of it, and can use it in our own storytelling. It pleases the brain and it makes your story memorable. How does it do that? The magic of psychology. So let's talk about it. Before we get into that though, here's a reminder to check out dcferguson.com for all my latest videos, overviews of my books, exclusive behind the scenes content for each of my series, and you can sign up for my newsletter. I should also mention that you could help me out in a big way. If you like this video, subscribe, and share it with any friends that also enjoy the art of storytelling. So let's start with the rule part of the rule of three. Is it really a rule? No. Can you break it and be successful? Yes, absolutely. However, you do so at your own peril, and the reason is the psychology behind this rule, which we're about to get into. With that said, what does the rule of three state? It says that when crafting a story, keep your construction to a set of three. We see this right away in what we've talked about on this channel many times. That's the three-act structure. But look a little deeper. Those three movements, from setting off on an adventure to a crisis of faith to the inevitable showdown against the ultimate trial, feel like a natural progression in our brains, and we can pick them out when we see them. Neo transitions from learning about the Matrix to joining the team on a mission. We've moved from Act 1 to Act 2, but we didn't need a neon sign to say so. Oral tradition and fairy tales are littered with the rule of three. Three blind mice, Goldilocks and the three bears, three little pigs, and so on. This shows how the rule extends beyond just structure. Luke, Han, and Leia, three main characters. A gross love triangle. Harry, Hermione, and Ron, three main characters again. Like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings is a trilogy. Speaking of the Matrix, there's also Neo, Trinity, and Morpheus. Also, the three films of the original Matrix trilogy. So, three main characters, three acts, three films. The number three is a repetition in storytelling in general, but why? Well, a big contributing factor is that three is a magic number in psychology. Even if that is a relatively new discipline, our ancient bros around the campfire telling stories uniquely understood that when there were more than three main parts of the story, the brain has trouble keeping track of them. I'm going to stop right there, because I know what you're saying. But DC, look at Avengers Infinity War, the number of characters was huge. Well, guy that talks to your screen, you're both right and wrong. You're wrong in the sense that we've already separately tackled each of these superheroes in smaller, bite-sized pieces in their own respective films, so that's a bit of a cheat code. But you're also right that this is a huge cast. So, how did the writers make sense of all these characters without it becoming noise? Well, again, they employ the rule of three. The story of Infinity War is told in three parts. The heroes that are on the ship heading to Titan, the heroes that are on Earth, and the Guardians of the Galaxy in space. Now, when the Guardians merge with the group on Titan, what do? We shift to an emotional focus on Thanos and Gamora. We're still running three stories that all come to a head in the climax. If you're right now sitting there going, oh, then congratulations. You are now cursed to see this pattern in everything. But that's another important part of this. There is another psychological piece to this that is its own magic. Humans are really good at pattern recognition, or at least we think we are. Our brains are so tuned to finding patterns that we often see them when they're not there. That's called a conspiracy theory. Unless it's actually true. Anyway, the point is that 3 is the bare minimum number for us to recognize something as a pattern or a group. Beginning, middle, and end. Luke, Leia, Han Solo. Act 1, 2, and 3. The Back to the Future trilogy. This also extends into other aspects of storytelling too. Frodo leaves the Shire, he's betrayed by Gollum at Mordor, he's tempted but manages to complete his journey. Frodo's character arc in The Lord of the Rings is also told in 3 parts. Chapters in a book typically follow this pattern of setup, escalation, and then payoff. I often stagger my chapter beats in a kind of order like this in my own novels. The psychology of that is pretty deep. Too much lull in your story, too much quiet, and you lose the audience's attention. So you turn on the conflict button, dial up some action, and then we can go back to the cooldown phase. You'll even notice jokes are often told in this 3-part rhythm. What do you call a duck with a medical degree? I don't know. What? I don't know either, but my doctor is a quack. Knowing this is cool and all, but what are we doing with it? How are we using it? Well, the good news is that you probably already are, even if you don't know it. Adhering to a 3-act structure, writing a trilogy, having a main character and 2 supporting characters, if you're doing any of that, something in your brain is already attuned to this pattern. But the cool thing is, if you're now cognizant of it, you can use it to your advantage. How? Well, you might not believe this, but the answer is 1.21 gigawatts. In this scene from Back to the Future, relatively early on, Marty has convinced Doc that he's from the future. When he shows Doc the videotape, he hears his future self explain that time travel happens when the nuclear reaction generates 1.21 gigawatts to the flux capacitor. Doc gasps and shouts, 1.21 gigawatts! Moments later, as Doc is frantically explaining that there's nothing that they can do in 1955 to generate that, he repeats the phrase 1.21 gigawatts. Then Marty says it back again, and it leads to them realizing what the solution is to their problem. Why did they say it so many times? Well, 1.21 gigawatts is a scientific measure of electricity. When I say 1.21 gigawatts with no context at all, you know I'm talking about Back to the Future. It was repeated at 3 separate points in that scene. The repetition 3 times was enough to commit it to memory. So this complicated scientific measure of energy was repeated to the point that a non-engineer, nerdy storyteller dude and the rest of us in the audience can immediately connect that measurement with time travel. The point is, repetition in threes also works to capture something in the audience's mind. Another thing to keep track of that'll make your characters more interesting is how the rule of 3 applies to the faces of a character in a story. You see, there's 3 faces of a character too. The public face, the one the world gets to see, that's 1. The person that they think they are, or the way that they act when they're alone, that's 2. And the most interesting face of all is the person that they are when their back is against the wall. Some would argue that this is the truest test of oneself, the person you really are when the world falls apart for you and those around you. If you remember The Dark Knight, the person Harvey Dent was in public was a fearless voice for law and order in the city. Behind closed doors, he was willing to cut corners and let Batman roam the streets. But when the chips were down and his world fell apart, the real Harvey Dent came through. He wanted to play judge, jury, and executioner, and let fate decide who lived or died at his hands. The Joker innately knew this, that the person he was would come through with a little push. That's the whole reasoning behind this scene at the hospital. Joker went to Harvey so he could release the beast. He was willing to gamble his life on it, that Harvey was more like him than he was like some bureaucrat. It's one of a million reasons why The Dark Knight isn't just a great Batman movie, it's just simply an incredible movie. You get this rich character complexity and depth, where it feels on the surface like Joker did this to him and made him this way. But the more you analyze it, the more you realize that's who Harvey Dent really was. The very climax of this story is Batman taking responsibility for everything bad that Harvey had done after that, to keep that face from the people of Gotham. Batman wanted them to believe that the public face really was the man Harvey was, because the truth would have made the people lose hope. Batman decides to take blame for his crimes and be hunted by the police, rather than let people know the truth of what kind of monster Harvey could become. It's a lie, and Batman is a hero for doing that. That's the message of the film. I'll stop there, because this film is so brilliant, and if I talk any more about it, we're just going to be sitting here doing an analysis of The Dark Knight and not talking about the rule of 3. So, go watch it again, folks. That's the takeaway here. Is this only for the gritty, dark, and crime-ridden stories? No, not at all. Shrek is a mean ogre in the swamp, right? Behind closed doors, he's a lonely curmudgeon. When his back is against the wall, he'll lay down his life to protect the people he cares about, because the only reason he didn't have friends this whole time was because he was afraid of being rejected. Shrek told us who he really was, and he was a hero. So, take that in. Getting back to how we use this, we can also employ this rule of 3 to take otherwise straightforward subplots and spruce them up a bit. What do I mean? Well, let's go over to Arya Stark and her revenge tour in Game of Thrones. She wants to kill all of the most powerful people in the world for what they did to her family. Revenge, as we discussed earlier, is a one-note subplot. You either get it or you don't. However, Arya has this subplot where the means to get to these high-powered and well-guarded targets is found in the form of the Faceless Ones, a group of assassins that can take the face of anyone they want. When Arya finds these people, it's an obvious solution to her revenge desires, but the cost of becoming a faceless assassin is revealed in the constant reminder, a girl has no name, meaning that she would have to abandon the person she was to become no one. Now, there are a lot of little details I could get into about this, not the least of which is what a good idea this is in-universe. You have to imagine constantly changing faces and personas, acting in ways that might be contrary to your personality or desires. It would be very taxing on the person that's doing it. But if that person abandons themselves, who they once were, and focuses only on the work, it gets easier. After all, you can't have an existential crisis about your identity when you no longer have one. There is no you to compare your actions to at that point. But therein lies the interesting twist in the arc. While Arya would use this power to get to everyone she ever wanted, she's proud of her heritage and knows who she is. So she decides to become a great assassin without ever letting go of her name, basically the opposite of what seemed like the easy answer for her. Additionally, she grows as a character as a result of that. This serves as a really great reminder that if you have an A-B subplot where either the character is going to succeed or fail at the one thing they're trying to do, you can really spruce it up by adding a third layer of depth to the subplot. Perhaps they fail at what they wanted, but they learn it's what they really needed. Perhaps they succeed, but not because they did it the way they were supposed to. Make the act of trying to accomplish their goal a lesson and a growth moment of itself. In that regard, the outcome of the subplot doesn't become A, B, or win or lose, but the progression and development of the person that they are. Isn't that neat how that works? There's also a phrase you might do well to remember, and that's the old adage, if at first you don't succeed, try again. How many attempts is that? Well, if you guessed 3, you're right. In storytelling, the rule of 3 will often be the number of attempts our protagonist takes at something before they succeed. In Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Indy faces a series of trials or traps. Basically, his first attempt is a test run to see what the stakes are. The second is a legitimate attempt and a failure, reminding us how dire the consequences will be if he fails. The last attempt he succeeds, because the only other alternative at that point is for him to fail and die. This functions as a mounting tension for our audience. In our logical thoughts, we know Indiana Jones is not going to die jumping to a truck from a motorcycle halfway through the movie. But having him come close to failure, that brush with death, keeps reminding us, the audience, that he is doing death-defying stunts and the stakes are high. It keeps us engaged, and it keeps our protagonist human, reminding us of their mortality and their ability to fail. Even pacing does this, and you don't even realize it. You're watching a horror movie. Our plucky heroine tries to turn on the light, but the switch doesn't work. She goes to another room and checks the fuse box. Everything in the whole house has been turned off. She turns it all back on. Something's behind her. See? 3 beats. Light switch, fuse box, monster. Setup, escalation, payoff. Luke, Han, and Leia. I like how I've been using Star Wars characters to count to 3 instead of numbers, and you've probably just been nodding your head this whole time like, I get what he's saying. And really, I'm just being a secret weirdo. The thing is, if I didn't get you going full Charlie with the maps and lines drawn with the thread and the crazy scribbles, then I didn't do my job. This number isn't a rule, but it is magic. Once you realize it, you quickly see that it appears everywhere. And here's the real kicker. Sometimes that's by design, and that's the real crafting part of story crafting. Sometimes, though, it isn't intentional. It's just a feature of Western storytelling that we're so accustomed to seeing that we integrate it into our own work whether we realize it or not. Figuring out which one is which isn't even really necessary, though, unless you're trying to judge the caliber of the writer you're dealing with, and even then it's more like astrology reading. What's more important now, that you're cognizant of it, is that you never have to wonder, how many times should the hero fail before they get it right? Or, how many times can my star-crossed lovers get it wrong before they realize they're meant for each other? Well, there's your answer. Except when it's not. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention when the rule of 3 can be broken or doesn't apply at all. These are two different things because subverting a pattern is not the same as not using the pattern to begin with. So the first thing to understand is subversion, when we use the rule of 3 and then break it. We do this by setting the pattern in your story. 1, 2, 3. Set up, escalation, payoff. Once we have that pattern going, take one of the beats away and what do you get? A feeling of suddenness. Look at this scene from The Walking Dead, Season 6, Episode 14. Denise is having an important conversation with Daryl and Rosita out in the open. And then all of a sudden there's an arrow sticking out of her eye. There was no escalation here. The violence was sudden, abrupt, and shocking. Now, what happens when we do the exact opposite? Look at it done for comedic effect here in Anchorman. First, we have the setup. Two rival news teams get against each other. Next, they're going to fight. There's your escalation. Now the weapons come out. But then, many more people join the fray. Brick kills somebody with a trident. This is escalation, and then it's more escalation, and then it's even more for good measure. It gives the feeling of complete chaos. In Anchorman, it leans into the absurdity of that, only being topped off by Ron Burgundy saying right after, well, that escalated quickly. Not using this rule at all is a different story. No, literally. When you're not using the rule of 3, you're probably working on your own pacing. Now, you might hear the critique uneven pacing in a lot of reviews, but keep in mind, that only means the ones that screwed it up. History is written by the victors, so if you make up your own pace and it works, no one is going to give you that critique. For example, The Wicked Instruments is a 2-book by 2-book series, not a trilogy, 2. The Singer and the Charlatan and the Princess and the Holy Juggernaut are 2 stories together. Goblins, Parents, and Other Monsters, and its follow-up, Murder, Heresy, and Other Mishaps, are a pair of stories together. If I ever get to finishing it, Book 5 and 6 are also a pair. That's my rhythm. Dune is another really good example because that is epic science fiction. Herbert didn't have to adhere to rigid pacing because he was building a whole universe. Dune was only the first story. So keep that in mind. It's not imperative that you write with the rule of 3, but if you're going to go outside of it altogether, it should be planned, purposeful, and you should be very mindful of the pacing that you'll be using. Now you're a master at the rule of 3. You've got the full 1.21 gigawatts going to the flux capacitor. I'm sorry if you can't ever look at storytelling the same way ever again, but fear not. It's so ingrained in our consciousness that it's really everywhere. Now that you see it, you can play with it a bit, and you can learn to turn it off again, so that you can enjoy a dumb movie without analyzing every single thing about it and just let it be what it is. Why can't you just do that, DC? Shut up and stop analyzing it for 2 minutes so I can watch my stupid space movie and eat my popcorn in peace. I mean, like someone who gets annoyed going to the movies with you might say. The rule of 3 is a bizarre mix of intentional and unintentional methods that have made their way into storytelling over the centuries, and now so burned into our minds we participate in it even when we don't mean to. But today was an exercise in pointing it out so that you can take the reins. If something isn't working in your storytelling, look at this rule as yet another tool in your arsenal to answer the question, why? Don't forget to check out my new website. The link is in the description below. You'll also find the link to my newsletter in the comments, where you can get a free book, read about all of my latest projects, and find other indie authors for your next great read. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear about new videos, and as always, have fun and get crafting.